My name is Kathleen. I'm 28 years old, and this Christmas morning, I'm standing at the entrance of Santa's village with my Aunt Dorothy, watching hundreds of families create memories in the theme park that now belongs to us. 3 weeks ago, my mother called to tell me I wasn't welcome at our family Christmas celebration, the same celebration we'd held here for 28 years. What she didn't know was that the $75 million family estate she was trying to steal would soon be mine. They chose greed over family, and now I'm choosing justice. Before I share what happened, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you spending the holidays with family, or maybe creating new traditions like I am? Please hit that like button if you believe family is about more than just blood, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for what's right. Your support means everything, and trust me, what comes next will show you why sometimes the best gift is the truth hidden in a Christmas box. To understand why being uninvited from Christmas felt like having my heart ripped out, you need to know what Santa's village meant to our family. My great-grandfather Theodore Winters built this magical theme park in 1952, transforming 500 acres of pine forest into a wonderland that would delight children for generations. It wasn't just a business to him, it was his gift to the community, a place where the magic of Christmas lived year-round. The park included not just rides and attractions, but also 2 resort hotels, a dozen specialty shops, and the crown jewel, a private family lodge nestled in the woods where every Winters family Christmas had been celebrated for over 70 years. By the time I came along, the property had grown into a $75 million empire, but to us it was simply home. My grandmother Rose, Theodore's daughter, had taken over operations in the 1970s and transformed it into one of the most beloved family destinations in New England. She was the heart of our family, a woman who could negotiate million-dollar deals in the morning and still make time to bake cookies with her grandchildren in the afternoon. I was her youngest grandchild, born to her daughter Margaret, and from the moment I could walk, I was her little shadow. The family dynamics were complicated, as they often are when significant wealth is involved. My mother Margaret was the eldest of 3 children, a woman who married young to my father James, and seemed content until his sudden death when I was 10. My uncle Richard, the middle child, had always been the black sheep, bouncing between failed business ventures and mysterious absences that we later learned were related to his gambling addiction. Then there was Aunt Dorothy, the youngest born with cerebral palsy that affected her mobility, but never her sharp mind or generous spirit. While Margaret and Richard saw Dorothy's disability as a weakness, grandmother Rose and I saw her strength. After my father died in a car accident, my world shattered. Margaret overwhelmed with grief, and suddenly single parenthood sent me to stay with grandmother Rose for what was supposed to be a few weeks. Those weeks turned into months, then years. Not that Margaret abandoned me entirely. She was there for birthdays and school events, but the day-to-day mothering came from grandmother Rose. She taught me to see Santa's village, not as a business, but as a responsibility, a trust we held for all the families who made memories there. Everything changed when Margaret remarried 5 years later. Stuart Blackwood swept into our lives like a tornado, all charm and expensive suits and grand promises. He was a real estate developer who'd made his fortune converting historic properties into luxury condos, and from the moment he set foot in Santa's village, I saw the calculating look in his eyes. He saw dollar signs where we saw memories, potential developments where we saw tradition. But Margaret was smitten, and soon Stuart was joining our family dinners, our board meetings, our Christmas celebrations. The first signs of trouble came 2 years ago when grandmother Rose's health began declining. She'd always been invincible in my eyes, but at 91, even the strongest hearts begin to falter. Suddenly, Margaret and Richard became incredibly attentive, visiting daily when before they'd barely managed monthly. They started scheduling family meetings that somehow never included Dorothy or me. Stuart began bringing his investment advisor friends to dinner, men who asked pointed questions about the park's finances and dropped hints about maximizing potential. I watched grandmother's face during these conversations, saw how her lips would purse when Stuart mentioned modernization opportunities, or when Richard casually suggested that maybe it's time to think about the future. She'd changed the subject, but I could see the worry in her eyes. One evening, after everyone else had left, she pulled me aside in the kitchen of the lodge. "Kathleen, darling," she said, her weathered hands holding mine. "This place isn't just property. It's proof that magic can exist if we're willing to protect it. Promise me you'll remember that." I promised, not understanding then how much that promise would cost me. The pressure intensified as grandmother's health worsened. Margaret started talking about power of attorney, about the burden of managing such a large estate, about how Dorothy couldn't possibly handle any responsibility given her condition. The way she said that word, like Dorothy's cerebral palsy, affected her mind instead of just her mobility, made my stomach turn. Richard backed her up, of course, especially after Stuart promised to help with his temporary cash flow problems once the estate was properly managed. I tried to protect grandmother from their machinations, but I was working full-time as a marketing director at a tech startup in the city, only able to visit on weekends. Dorothy did her best, but they'd systematically excluded her from family decisions for so long that her protests fell on deaf ears. We watched helplessly as Margaret and Stuart tightened their grip scheduling meetings with lawyers when they knew I couldn't attend presenting documents to grandmother when she was tired or medicated. The last straw came when I arrived for a weekend visit to find grandmother in tears. She wouldn't tell me what happened, just kept repeating, "They don't understand what Theodore built this for. They don't understand." That night, she made me help her up to the attic of the lodge, a journey that took nearly an hour with her limited mobility. There, among decades of Christmas decorations, she showed me an ornate wooden box decorated with hand-painted reindeer. "The truth is in the Christmas box, sweetheart," she whispered. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do." October arrived with its usual blast of New England color, painting the mountains around Santa's village in shades of gold and crimson. But inside Grandmother Rose's hospital room, the world was reduced to the sterile white of walls and the steady beep of monitors. I'd taken emergency leave from work when she'd had her stroke, and for 3 days I hadn't left her side. Margaret and Richard visited in shifts, always accompanied by Stuart, always with papers they insisted needed signing. But grandmother, even in her weakened state, refused to hold a pen. On the third night, when the October moon was hidden behind clouds and the hospital had settled into its quiet rhythm, grandmother's eyes fluttered open. Her hand found mine, surprisingly strong for someone so close to the edge. "Kathleen?" She whispered, her voice like autumn leaves rustling. "The Christmas box. Don't let them destroy what Theodore built for joy." Those were her last coherent words. She held on for 3 more days, but she never spoke again. I was holding her hand when she passed October 15th at 3:47 in the morning, the exact time she used to wake up every Christmas morning to start preparing our family feast. The funeral was a testament to how many lives Grandmother Rose had touched. Thousands came to pay their respects, from employees who'd worked at Santa's village for decades to families who'd been visiting for generations. But even in grief, I could see the vultures circling. Margaret played the grieving daughter, perfectly accepting condolences with practiced grace, while Stuart glad-handed with local businessmen. Richard showed up late, reeking of whiskey and cigarettes, his bloodshot eyes scanning the crowd like he was looking for someone he owed money to. The real betrayal began at the reception. While guests shared memories of grandmother's kindness, I overheard Stuart on a phone call in the coat room. "Yes, the old woman finally kicked it," he said, not knowing I was behind the door. "Give us a few weeks to get the paperwork sorted and we'll move forward with the development. Trust me, by spring Santa's village will be nothing but a memory, and Winterland Luxury Estates will be breaking ground." I confronted him immediately, my grief transforming into rage. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "It's business, Kathleen," he said, straightening his tie. "Your grandmother was sitting on a gold mine, pretending it was still 1952. Your mother understands progress. Maybe it's time you did too." When I threatened to tell everyone what I'd heard, he just smiled. "Who do you think they'll believe, the grieving widow, an established businessman, or the hysterical granddaughter who's about to lose her meal ticket?" The formal reading of the will was scheduled for November 1st, but Margaret called a family meeting for Thanksgiving. She insisted everyone attend, even Dorothy, who rarely came to the main house anymore since they'd made it clear she wasn't welcome. We gathered in the dining room, where grandmother had hosted so many joyful celebrations, but the atmosphere was anything but festive. Margaret sat at the head of the table, grandmother's place, with Stuart at her right hand like some malevolent counselor. I wanted to share grandmother's wishes with the family first. Margaret began producing a document from her leather portfolio. As executor of her estate, I've been working closely with her attorneys to ensure everything is handled properly. She spread the papers on the table with theatrical precision. The estate will be divided between Richard and myself as the competent adult children. Dorothy will receive a generous monthly stipend, of course, managed through a trust that Stuart has graciously agreed to oversee. Dorothy's face went white. "That's not possible," she said, her voice shaking. "Mother would never—" She promised the park would be protected. Margaret's expression hardened. "Mother wasn't well at the end, Dorothy. She couldn't possibly make complex decisions about an estate this size. It's for the best that responsible parties handle things." The condescension in her voice made me see red. "You mean parties who've already promised to sell to developers?" I interjected. Every head turned to me. I heard Stuart on the phone at the funeral. Winterland, luxury estates, ring. Any bells? Stuart's face darkened, but Margaret maintained her composure. Kathleen, you're obviously emotional. Losing grandmother has been hard on all of us, but these wild accusations won't bring her back. Richard finally spoke up, his words slightly slurred. Kid's got a point, though. Grandmother loved that park more than anything. Seems weird she'd leave it to be sold. For a moment, I thought I had an ally, but Stuart shut him down quickly. Richard, I thought we discussed your debts. Wouldn't it be better for everyone if this transition happened smoothly? My uncle's face went from red to white in seconds. Whatever Stuart had on him was enough to buy his silence. The meeting devolved from there. I demanded to see the original, will the lawyer's certification, anything that proved this travesty was real. Margaret accused me of being manipulated by Dorothy, of trying to steal what wasn't mine. You lived off grandmother's generosity for years, she spat. Now that she's gone, you can't accept that the free ride is over. The accusation stung because there was just enough twisted truth in it to hurt. I had lived with grandmother. She had supported me through college. She had been more of a mother to me than Margaret ever was. Stuart stood all 6 feet of him, radiating menace. I think you need to leave, Kathleen. Consider carefully before you make any more accusations. Slander is a serious legal matter, and grieving or not, we will protect our interests. I looked around the table at these people who were supposed to be my family. Margaret's face was cold, Richard wouldn't meet my eyes, and Dorothy was quietly crying. This wasn't a family meeting, it was an ambush. The call came on December 5th, while I was at work trying to pretend my world hadn't imploded. Margaret's number on my phone made my stomach drop. Kathleen, she said without preamble, I'm calling to inform you that you're not welcome at the family Christmas celebration this year. The words hit like physical blows. 28 years of Christmas at Santa's village, 28 years of tradition, erased with a phone call. You can't do this, I whispered, my throat tight. Grandmother would never... Grandmother is dead. Margaret cut me off. And if you continue this campaign to turn the family against us, if you keep filling Dorothy's head with false hope, then you'll find yourself permanently excluded from more than just Christmas. Stuart has already begun preliminary negotiations with buyers. By next Christmas, there won't be a Santa's village to visit anyway. The line went dead, leaving me standing in my office phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. They weren't just taking my inheritance. They were erasing my history, my home, my family. But as the shock wore off and anger took its place, grandmother's words echoed in my mind. The truth is in the Christmas box. Whatever she'd hidden in that attic, it was time to find it. The night of December 10th found me doing something I never imagined, breaking into my childhood home. Well, not breaking in exactly, since I still had a key, but sneaking into the lodge while Margaret and Stuart attended a developer's gala felt like a betrayal of everything the place represented. Dorothy was with me, her wheelchair moving silently across the hardwood floors we'd played on as children. Are you sure about this? She whispered, even though we knew the house was empty. Margaret had given the staff the week off, probably to avoid witnesses to whatever dealings she and Stuart were conducting. The attic access was in the back hallway up a narrow staircase that Dorothy couldn't navigate. Keep watch, I told her, my heart hammering as I climbed the creaking steps. The attic was exactly as I remembered, dusty, cramped, filled with decades of Christmas past. Boxes of ornaments, artificial trees from the years grandmother experimented with silver and white themes, Harold the elf, who'd scared me as a child with his mechanical movements. And there, tucked behind a stack of vintage Santa's Village promotional posters, was the wooden box grandmother had shown me. My hands shook as I lifted it, the painted reindeer still vibrant despite the years. Inside, nestled in red velvet, were documents, a USB drive, and a letter in grandmother's distinctive handwriting. My dearest Kathleen, it began. If you're reading this, then my fears have come to pass. What you'll find here is the truth about your mother and uncle's intentions, and more importantly, the legal means to stop them. The real will was there, dated just 6 months ago, properly notarized and witnessed by 3 people, including grandmother's personal physician. The estate was to be divided between Dorothy and me as co-trustees, with specific instructions that Santa's Village was to be preserved, in perpetuity as a place of joy and wonder for all families. Margaret and Richard were each left $5 million, generous by any standard, but not enough for their appetites. There was also a sealed envelope marked, to be opened only if Margaret or Richard contest this will. The USB drive contained something even more damning: security footage from the lodge email correspondence between Stuart and potential buyers, dating back 2 years, and most shocking of all, video testimony from grandmother herself. I plugged it into my phone, and her familiar face filled the screen. She looked tired but determined, sitting in her study just weeks before her death. I rose. Theodore Winters, being of sound mind and body, want to state clearly that any will, leaving the bulk of my estate to Margaret and Richard, is fraudulent. I have evidence that my daughter and son, in conspiracy with Stuart Blackwood, have been planning to steal the estate and destroy everything my father built. The evidence was overwhelming. Screenshots of emails where Stuart discussed handling the old woman and making sure the paperwork is airtight. Bank statements showing Margaret had been siphoning money from estate accounts, small amounts, at first then larger, as grandmother's health declined. Most disturbing were the medical records showing that grandmother's medication had been changed without her knowledge, prescriptions that would have made her more compliant, more confused. They hadn't just waited for her to die, they'd hastened her decline. Dorothy was pacing anxiously when I came back down my arms full of evidence. Her face went from worried to shocked as I spread everything on the kitchen table. My God, Kathleen, they were poisoning her. I showed her the medication lists, the forged signatures on the fake will that didn't match grandmother's actual handwriting, the timestamps on emails proving Stuart had been planning this before he even married my mother. We have to go to the police, Dorothy said, but I was already thinking ahead. First, we need copies of everything. Then we need a lawyer, a good one. We spent the next 3 hours systematically documenting everything. Dorothy, despite her physical limitations, had a scanner app on her phone and methodically digitized every page while I explored the rest of the box's contents. There were more treasures, incorporation documents for the park, showing grandmother had created a preservation trust years ago, contact information for a law firm in Boston that specialized in estate fraud, and photographs I'd never seen of great-grandfather Theodore with a young Rose standing in front of the park's original entrance. The sealed envelope was the final piece. Inside was a handwritten confession from Richard dated 3 years ago. I, Richard Winters, acknowledge that I owe Stuart Blackwood $2,000 from gambling debts. In exchange for his clearing these debts, I agree to support any action necessary to ensure the Santa's Village property can be liquidated after Mother's death. Below his signature was a list of creditors, including names I recognized from news stories about organized crime in Boston. My uncle hadn't just sold out his family, he'd sold his soul to dangerous people. As we prepared to leave, headlights swept across the driveway, Stuart's Mercedes arriving home early. Dorothy grabbed the original documents while I shoved copies into my bag. We could hear Stuart's voice loud and angry on a phone call as we slipped out the back door. I don't care what it takes, he was saying. Find out who's been asking questions about the will. If it's that brat Kathleen, we need to shut her down before she ruins everything. We made it to my car, Dorothy transferring from her wheelchair with practiced efficiency born from years of escaping uncomfortable family situations. As I drove away, I could see Stuart's silhouette in the doorway, phone still pressed to his ear. He hadn't seen us, but something told me our time was running out. Where now? Dorothy asked, clutching the Christmas box like a lifeline. Boston. I replied, my hands steady on the wheel despite my racing heart. We have a law firm to visit first thing tomorrow. That night in a hotel room paid for with cash, Dorothy and I went through everything one more time. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd systematically isolated grandmother, convinced medical professionals to over-medicate her forged legal documents, and planned to destroy a 70-year legacy for profit. And based on Stuart's phone call, they were willing to do whatever it took to keep their secret. You know they'll come after us, Dorothy said quietly, her fingers tracing the painted reindeer on the box. Stuart has connections, money, power, and Richard's creditors. If they think the estate won't be sold, they'll want their money from somewhere. I thought about my apartment, my job, my normal life that already felt like a distant memory. Then I thought about grandmother's face in that video, the determination in her eyes as she fought to protect what she loved even as her own family betrayed her. Let them come, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. We have the truth. And grandmother always said the truth was the most powerful gift of all. The law offices of Hartwell Chen and Associates occupied the top floor of a historic Boston building, all dark wood and leather-bound books. James Hartwell himself, a dignified man in his 70s who'd known grandmother for decades, reviewed our evidence with growing alarm. This is extensive fraud, he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. But Rose was right to prepare so thoroughly. With this documentation, we can not only challenge the false will, but pursue criminal charges. He paused, studying Richard's confession. Though I must warn you, people capable of this level of deception rarely surrender without a fight. His warning proved prophetic. That very afternoon, As Dorothy and I returned to my apartment, we found the door ajar, the lock clearly tampered with. Inside was chaos. Every drawer emptied furniture, overturned, my laptop missing. But they hadn't found what they were looking for. The evidence was safe in Hartwell's office vault. What they had done was leave a message spray-painted across my living room wall. "Back off or worse." I called the police, but the officer who responded seemed oddly uninterested. "Probably just a random break-in," he said, despite the specific threat. "You might want to stay with friends for a while." It wasn't until later that I remembered Stuart bragging about his golf buddy, the deputy police chief. The official channels weren't going to help us. The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. Margaret's voice was ice cold. "I don't know what game you're playing, Kathleen, but it ends now. Return whatever you think you found, and we can discuss a modest settlement. Continue this path, and I'll destroy you." I found courage I didn't know I had. "Like you destroyed grandmother, I have the real will, Margaret, and the evidence of what you did to her. It's over." The silence stretched before she spoke again. "You always were an ungrateful child, living off mother's charity, pretending you were special. You're nobody, Kathleen. Nobody will believe a word you say." The line went dead, but I knew this was just the beginning. War had been declared. The attacks escalated quickly. My boss received an anonymous tip that I'd been embezzling from the company. Despite no evidence, the mere accusation was enough for suspension pending investigation. My bank called to inform me of suspicious activity on my accounts. Somehow, they'd been frozen. When I tried to use my credit cards, they were declined. In less than 48 hours, Stuart had systematically cut off my financial lifelines. Dorothy wasn't spared either. The assisted living facility where she lived received notice that her payments had stopped, that she needed to vacate within a week. When she protested, showing proof of her trust fund, they claimed the trust was under investigation for fraud. It was a lie, but the facility's board, intimidated by legal threats from Stuart's attorneys, began proceedings to transfer Dorothy to a state facility. The thought of my brilliant, independent aunt locked away in an institution made me furious. We regrouped at Hartwell's office, where he worked furiously to counter each attack. Injunctions were filed, emergency motions submitted. But the legal system moved slowly, while Stuart's harassment was immediate and relentless. I started receiving calls at all hours, breathing on the other end, or worse, recordings of my own conversations played back to me. My car tires were slashed not once, but 3 times. When I parked in a public garage to avoid street damage, I returned to find "thief" keyed into every panel. Then Richard's creditors entered the picture. The first was almost polite, a well-dressed man who approached me at a coffee shop. "Miss Winters, my employers are concerned about their investments with your uncle. We understand there may be changes to the estate distribution. We simply want assurance that obligations will be honored." When I told him to speak with Richard, his demeanor shifted. "Your uncle has made promises based on his expected inheritance. If those promises can't be kept, we'll need to explore other avenues for satisfaction." The second visit wasn't polite at all. 3 men cornered me in the parking lot of the grocery store. Only the appearance of a security guard prevented whatever they'd planned. The message was clear: Richard owed dangerous people money, and if the estate sale didn't happen, they'd collect from whoever they could. I hired a bodyguard that day, maxing out my one remaining credit card to do it. Dorothy proved stronger than any of us expected. When they tried to have her declared incompetent, she arrived at the hearing with her own medical experts and decades of records proving her mental acuity. She'd been secretly recording conversations for years, knowing the family viewed her disability as weakness. She played a recording of Margaret saying, "Once mother dies, we'll put Dorothy somewhere she can be properly managed. It's for her own good, really." The judge was horrified. Hartwell worked 18-hour days building our case. He uncovered more evidence of fraud. Stuart had been using his development company to launder money, and the Santa's Village sale was meant to clean $2 million in dirty funds. Margaret had been complicit, signing documents that made her liable for federal charges. Richard's gambling wasn't just personal. He'd been running illegal games in properties Stuart owned, taking a cut that never appeared on tax returns. The forensic accountant Hartwell hired found the smoking gun. Over 5 years, Margaret and Stuart had stolen nearly $5 million from grandmother's accounts. Small transfers labeled as household expenses or medical costs that actually went to offshore accounts. They'd been so confident in their plan, they'd gotten sloppy, leaving a digital trail that led straight back to them. Every dollar was documented, every transaction traced. Stuart's response was to escalate further. The brake failure happened on December 18th, 5 days before the court hearing. I was driving to meet Hartwell when the pedal went to the floor. Only the fact that I was in slow city traffic saved my life. The mechanic found clear evidence of tampering cut brake lines that couldn't be explained by wear. The police, suddenly interested, now that attempted murder was involved, opened an investigation. That night, Dorothy's facility caught fire. It started in the storage room next to her unit, spreading quickly through the old building. By pure luck, Dorothy was in the common area playing cards, but her room and all her possessions were destroyed. The fire marshal found accelerant proof of arson. No one could prove Stuart's involvement, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidence. We went into hiding, after that moving between hotels, paying cash, using borrowed phones. Hartwell hired private security former FBI agents who took the threat seriously. They uncovered something that changed everything. Stuart was being investigated by federal authorities for his connections to organized crime. Our lawsuit had inadvertently exposed a larger criminal network, and now the FBI was interested in our evidence. The private investigator also found Stuart's weakness. Despite his careful planning, he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd been recorded not by us, but by Richard, who'd secretly taped conversations as insurance. In the recordings, Stuart explicitly discussed forging the will-drugging grandmother and his plans to eliminate anyone who interfered. Richard, in a rare moment of conscience or self-preservation, had hidden the recordings in a safety deposit box and mailed the key to Dorothy years ago with instructions to only use it if something happened to him. With federal agents now involved and criminal charges looming, Stuart made one last desperate play. He offered a deal through intermediaries, drop the lawsuit, accept $10 million each, and everyone walks away. The estate would still be sold, Santa's village demolished, but Dorothy and I would be wealthy. It was tempting for exactly 5 seconds until I remembered grandmother's face, her plea to protect what her father built. No deal, I told Hartwell. We're taking them down. The stage was set for the December 23rd emergency hearing. We had evidence, federal backing, and the truth. They had money connections and desperation. Dorothy squeezed my hand as we prepared to enter the courthouse. Whatever happens, she said, grandmother would be proud. We didn't let them win without a fight. I thought about the Christmas box safely in evidence and how grandmother had known we'd need weapons for this war. She'd armed us with truth, and now it was time to use it. December 23rd dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect New England winter mornings that made Santa's village look like a snow globe come to life. But Dorothy and I weren't at the park. We were in a federal courthouse in Boston, surrounded by lawyers, security, and enough tension to crack marble. Hartwell had assembled a formidable team of state lawyers, criminal prosecutors, and federal agents who'd been building a RICO case against Stuart's organization. Margaret arrived in a black town car, dressed like she was attending a board meeting, rather than fighting for her freedom. Stuart flanked her, his usual confidence cracked, but not broken. Richard came separately, looking haggard and jumpy, constantly checking over his shoulder. His creditors had been making their presence known, and federal protection only extended so far. The gallery was packed with reporters. News of the $75 million estate battle had leaked, and everyone wanted to see how the Winters family empire would fall. Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the bench, reviewed the preliminary documents with a face that grew stonier by the page. This is one of the most extensive fraud cases I've ever presided over, she began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. Before we proceed, I want to make clear that this hearing will determine not just the disposition of the estate, but potential criminal referrals. Everyone present should be aware of their Fifth Amendment rights. Hartwell presented our case with methodical precision. The forged will was examined by 3 handwriting experts who unanimously declared it fake. The real will, authenticated and verified, was entered into evidence. Then came the financial records projected on screens for everyone to see. $5 million stolen over 5 years, each transaction documented. Margaret's face remained composed, but I saw her hands tremble as her signatures appeared on fraudulent transfers. The medical evidence was devastating. Dr. Patricia Hornsby, grandmother's physician, testified via video link from her retirement in Florida. I was pressured by Mrs. Blackwood to prescribe medications that I felt were inappropriate for Rose's condition. She said, her voice heavy with regret. When I refused, I was removed as her physician. I've lived with that guilt ever since. The new prescriptions written by a Dr. Stuart had recommended were analyzed by toxicologists. The combination would have left grandmother confused, compliant, and ultimately hastened her decline. Stuart's attorney, a shark in a $3,000 suit, tried to discredit each piece of evidence. The signatures were similar enough to be genuine mistakes. The financial transfers were legitimate expenses for grandmother's care. The medication changes were based on evolving medical needs. For every fact, he had an alternative explanation, delivered with the smooth confidence of someone used to making juries doubt their own eyes. Then Hartwell played grandmother's video testimony. The courtroom fell silent as Rose Winters appeared on screen, frail but fierce, every inch the matriarch who'd run an empire. "I am recording this because I fear for my life," she began, and Margaret audibly gasped. For 20 minutes, grandmother detailed the pressure, the threats, the attempts to control her. She showed documents they'd tried to make her sign, explained how she'd hidden evidence, named names and dates with the precision of someone who'd run a business for 50 years. "My greatest regret," grandmother said as the video neared its end, "is that my own children value money over family profit over legacy. But my greatest joy is knowing that Kathleen and Dorothy will protect what matters. The truth is in the Christmas box, and the truth will set things right." When her image faded, several people in the gallery were crying. Even Judge Harrison had to pause to compose herself. Stuart cracked first. As federal agents presented evidence of his money, laundering his connections to organized crime, his plans to use the estate sale to clean dirty money, his attorney requested a recess. When they returned, Stuart was ready to deal. He would testify against his connections in exchange for reduced charges. The house of cards was collapsing, and he was scrambling to save himself. Margaret's composure finally shattered when Richard's confession was read. Her own brother had sold her out to save his skin, documenting every conversation, every plan, every crime. "You bastard!" she hissed across the courtroom. "After everything I did for you." Richard wouldn't meet her eyes, slumped in his chair like a broken man. His creditors were in the gallery, and federal protection, or not, he knew his debts would come due. The most dramatic moment came when Dorothy was called to testify. They'd tried to paint her as incompetent, but she wheeled herself to the witness stand with dignity that filled the room. She spoke eloquently about grandmother's wishes, about the family's treatment of her disability, about finding the Christmas box exactly where grandmother said it would be. "My mother knew her children had lost their way," Dorothy said, looking directly at Margaret. "But she never stopped hoping they'd remember what mattered. Even now, I hope my sister remembers the Christmases when we were young before greed poisoned everything." Judge Harrison didn't need long to decide. The forged will was thrown out. The real will validated. The estate would transfer immediately to Dorothy and me as co-trustees. Criminal charges were recommended for Margaret, Stuart, and Richard. Arrest warrants were issued on the spot. As federal marshals approached with handcuffs, Margaret turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm still your mother," she said. "Doesn't that mean anything?" I thought about all the Christmases she'd missed, all the moments grandmother had filled, all the pain she'd caused chasing money. "It means I'll visit you in prison," I replied. "That's more than you gave grandmother." Stuart was led away, shouting about appeals, about connections, about how we'd regret this. Richard went quietly, looking almost relieved. His creditors were already being rounded up by federal agents, the entire network unraveling. Margaret maintained her dignity until the doors closed. Then I heard her sobbing echo down the courthouse hallway. The family that had tried to steal Christmas had instead stolen their own futures. Hartwell shook our hands, exhausted but victorious. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said. "You fought for more than money. You fought for what's right." Dorothy and I held each other in the courthouse lobby, overwhelmed by what had just happened. We'd won, but victory felt hollow with our family destroyed. Then Dorothy smiled through her tears. "You know what today is, December 23rd. We can still make it to Santa's village for Christmas Eve." The media descended as we left the courthouse, shouting questions about the estate, the arrests, the future of Santa's village. I thought about grandmother, about great-grandfather Theodore, about all the families who'd made memories in our magical corner of the world. "Santa's village will remain open," I announced, Dorothy beside me. "It will stay exactly what it was meant to be, a place where Christmas lives all year long, where families come together, where magic is real. That's what grandmother wanted, and that's what she'll have." As we drove toward the mountains, toward home, snow began to fall. Dorothy reached over and squeezed my hand. "You know what the best part is?" she asked. "We get to have Christmas at Santa's village after all, just not with the family we expected." I thought about the staff who'd worked there for decades, the visitors who returned year after year, the community that had rallied around us during the fight. "Maybe that's exactly the family grandmother wanted us to find," I replied. And as the familiar peaks came into view, I realized that sometimes losing one family means finding another. And sometimes the best gifts come in boxes we're afraid to open. The snow was falling heavily by the time Dorothy and I reached Santa's village on the evening of December 23rd. The park should have been closed, the season ended, but word of our courtroom victory had spread faster than winter wind. As we approached the entrance gates, we saw something that made us both cry. Hundreds of lights blazing the Ferris wheel, turning slowly against the white sky, and what looked like the entire staff standing in the entrance plaza, applauding. Harold Finch, who'd been head of operations for 30 years, stepped forward with keys in his weathered hands. "Welcome home, Miss Kathleen, Miss Dorothy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We heard the news. Figured you might want to see the place lit up for Christmas Eve." Behind him, maintenance workers ride, operators, shop clerks, and restaurant staff, many who'd feared for their jobs just hours ago, stood beaming. They'd spent their own time and money preparing the park, refusing to let Stuart's plans dim the lights of Christmas. Dorothy and I toured the park like we were seeing it for the first time. Every corner held Memories the Carousel, where grandmother had taught me to reach for the brass ring, the hot chocolate stand, where she told stories of great-grandfather Theodore, the sledding hill, where generations of children had laughed their way down. The employees shared their own stories as we walked. Maria, who'd run the candy shop for 20 years, told us how grandmother had helped her daughter get into college. Tom, the head groundskeeper, revealed that grandmother had quietly paid his wife's cancer treatment bills. Story after story of kindness repaid with loyalty. At the center of the park stood the giant Christmas tree, 60 feet of Douglas fir that had been planted by Theodore himself. It should have been dark, the lighting ceremony, canceled by Margaret's orders, but tonight it blazed with thousands of lights. "We held our own ceremony," Harold explained. "Figured Miss Rose wouldn't want tradition broken just because her children lost their way." At the base of the tree, they'd placed a photo of grandmother surrounded by flowers and handwritten notes from employees and visitors who'd heard about her death. The family lodge had been cleaned and prepared a fire, crackling in the great stone fireplace. The staff had outdone themselves, bringing dishes for an impromptu Christmas Eve feast. As word spread through the community, more people arrived. The mayor, who'd been fighting Stuart's development plans for years, brought wine. Local business owners who'd feared the economic impact of losing Santa's village brought desserts. Families who'd been visiting for generations brought ornaments for the lodge tree. By midnight, the lonely Christmas Dorothy and I had expected had transformed into a celebration of community. Around the fire, people shared their Santa's village memories. A couple who'd gotten engaged on the Ferris wheel 20 years ago. A mother whose autistic son found peace in the sensory-friendly areas grandmother had installed. A veteran who'd worked summers at the park to pay for college, now a successful engineer. Each story was a thread in the tapestry grandmother and Theodore had woven, proof that some things matter more than profit margins. Dorothy, who'd been systematically excluded from family celebrations for years, was treated like the guest of honor she deserved to be. The staff had quietly retrofitted areas of the lodge for her wheelchair years ago, following grandmother's instructions, even though Margaret had said it wasn't necessary. Watching Dorothy's joy at being included, truly included, I understood another layer of grandmother's gift. She hadn't just left us property. She'd left us a place where everyone belonged. As midnight approached, Harold pulled me aside. "There's something Miss Rose asked me to give you, but only after the estate was secure." He handed me an envelope, grandmother's handwriting, shaky but clear, for Kathleen, when Christmas returns to Santa's village. Inside was a photo I'd never seen grandmother as a young woman standing with Theodore in front of the original park entrance. On the back she'd written, "The magic isn't in the place, darling. It's in the people who understand that joy shared is joy doubled. You understand. That's why it's yours." Christmas Eve dawned clear and bright. Dorothy and I had barely slept, too overwhelmed by the warmth of the previous night. We made a decision over coffee. Santa's village would open free to the public on Christmas Day for the first time in its history. The staff volunteered, immediately refusing overtime pay. "It's what Miss Rose would have wanted," Maria said, and heads nodded all around. Word spread through social media, local news picked it up, and by noon cars were lining up at the gates. What happened next was pure magic. Families who couldn't afford Christmas presents brought their children for a day, free joy. Foster families, group homes, anyone who needed Christmas, found it at Santa's village. The staff worked tirelessly, their own families joining to help. Local restaurants sent food when our supplies ran low. A group of musicians set up near the carousel, playing carols for tips they donated to Dorothy's new accessibility foundation. By evening, over 5,000 people had visited, each one proof that grandmother's vision lived on. The moment that broke me came late in the afternoon. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, tugged on my coat. "Are you the lady who saved Christmas?" she asked, clutching a stuffed reindeer from the gift shop that someone had anonymously paid for. I knelt to her level, remembering asking grandmother similar questions at that age. "No, sweetheart, I just made sure the magic stayed where it belongs. The real person who saved Christmas did it a long time ago by building a place where love matters more than money. That evening, Dorothy and I stood where we'd started this journey, watching families enjoy the park. But now we weren't alone. Harold stood with us and Maria and Tom and dozens of others who'd become our chosen family. In the distance, we could see the courthouse where Margaret, Stuart, and Richard were being processed. I felt sadness for what they'd lost, but no regret for what we'd done. They'd chosen their path, and we'd chosen ours. You know what grandmother would say right now? Dorothy asked, snowflakes catching in her silver hair. I thought about all the Christmas Eves we'd spent together, all the wisdom disguised as holiday cheer. She'd say that the best presents don't fit under a tree, I replied. Dorothy smiled. And she'd be right. Look what she gave us: a purpose, a community, and proof that good still triumphs when people stand together. As the last visitors reluctantly headed home, promising to return, the staff began the gentle process of closing the park. But the light stayed on, a beacon in the winter darkness. Tomorrow would bring challenges, insurance issues, legal paperwork, the complex process of protecting the park permanently. But tonight on Christmas Eve, Santa's village was exactly what Theodore had dreamed. And Rose had protected a place where magic was real, where everyone was welcome, where the spirit of Christmas could live all year long. And as Dorothy and I headed back to the lodge, I whispered a thank you to the grandmother who'd hidden truth in a Christmas box, knowing we'd be brave enough to open it. Christmas morning arrived, with the kind of pristine snowfall that makes the world look newly made. Dorothy and I sat in the lodge's kitchen, the same table where grandmother had rolled out cookie dough for 50 years, sharing coffee and the surreal quiet after yesterday's magical chaos. The park was closed today, giving the exhausted staff a well-deserved rest, but through the windows we could see families still stopping at the gates, taking photos, leaving flowers and notes at the entrance. We actually did it, Dorothy said, her voice wondering. We saved Santa's village. But even as we celebrated, reality intruded. My phone, silent for days while I'd focused on the legal battle, now buzzed constantly. Lawyers calling about estate transfers, reporters wanting exclusive interviews, distant relatives suddenly remembering we existed. The weight of managing a $75 million property was settling on shoulders that had never carried such responsibility. The first call that actually mattered came from the Federal Detention Center. Margaret wanted to speak with me. My instinct was to refuse, but Dorothy, wise as always, encouraged me to listen. Anger's a poison we drink, hoping others will suffer, she said, quoting grandmother. Maybe it's time to start healing. So I accepted the collect call, my heart hammering, as I heard my mother's voice, small and broken, nothing like the confident woman who'd uninvited me from Christmas. Kathleen. She began, then stopped, crying too hard to continue. When she finally spoke again, the words tumbled out. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I lost myself somewhere, lost what mattered. Stuart promised so much, and I was weak and lonely, and I let him twist everything good into something ugly. She talked about the pressure of being the eldest, the fear of never measuring up to grandmother's legacy, the way Stuart had played on her insecurities. It wasn't an excuse, just an explanation. And for the first time in months, she sounded like my mother. I know you'll never forgive me, she continued, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that somewhere under all the greed and stupidity, I do love you. I just forgot that love matters more than money. Mom tried to tell me, but I was too far gone to listen. The call ended with her asking just one thing, that I let her children, my half-siblings from Stuart, visit the park sometimes. They were innocents in this mess, and they deserved the magic of Santa's village. I promised they'd always be welcome. Richard's situation was more complicated. His creditors, despite the federal investigation, still wanted their money. The $5 million he'd inherited wasn't enough to cover his debts, and without Stuart's protection, he was vulnerable. He'd fled the state, calling Dorothy from a truck stop somewhere in Nevada. I know I don't deserve help, he said, but I'm scared. These people don't accept apologies as payment. Dorothy, whose compassion exceeded what anyone could expect, worked with Hartwell to set up a payment plan, using Richard's inheritance contingent on him entering treatment for his gambling addiction. Stuart was another matter entirely. Facing decades in federal prison, he tried every angle to reduce his sentence. He offered to reveal more about his criminal connections, claimed Margaret had masterminded everything, even suggested I'd fabricated evidence. But the FBI had him cold, and his network was unraveling faster than he could make deals. His assets were frozen, his development company under investigation, his reputation destroyed. The man who'd tried to steal Christmas had lost everything that mattered to him. The work of preserving Santa's village began immediately. Dorothy threw herself into accessibility improvements with the passion of someone who'd been excluded too long. Within weeks, she'd designed plans for sensory-friendly areas, wheelchair-accessible rides, and programs for children with disabilities. Every child deserves magic, she said, watching architects bring her visions to life. Grandmother knew that. Now we make sure everyone else knows it too. I focused on the business side, learning from Harold and the senior staff how to run a multi-million-dollar operation. It was overwhelming at first, budgets and insurance and maintenance schedules blurring together, but gradually patterns emerged. Grandmother had run the park with a simple philosophy: people first, profits second. When we followed that guideline, decisions became clear. Yes to employee healthcare improvements, no to cutting corners on safety. Yes to community programs, no to corporate sponsorships that would compromise the park's character. The healing process was harder than the business challenges. Trauma doesn't vanish with victory, it lingers in unexpected moments. I'd wake at night, heart racing, certain someone was breaking in. Dorothy struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why she'd inherited so much when she'd done nothing but be born with a disability the family couldn't accept. We both started therapy individually and together, learning to process betrayal, grief, and unexpected fortune. Spring arrived with its own miracles. The park reopened to record crowds, families who'd feared losing their traditions, returning with joy. We instituted Rose's Day on Grandmother's birthday, when admission was free for seniors and their grandchildren. The Dorothy Center for Inclusive Play became a model for accessible entertainment nationwide. We hired back every employee Stuart had planned to terminate and added more as programs expanded. The legal proceedings dragged on, but justice ground forward. Margaret pled guilty to fraud and elder abuse, receiving 5 years with possibility of parole in 3. At her sentencing, she read a statement about how greed had corrupted her values, how she'd lost her mother twice, first to death, and then to her own actions. Richard got probation and mandatory treatment, his cooperation with authorities, and genuine remorse weighing in his favor. Stuart received 25 years for racketeering, money laundering, and attempted murder. He still maintains his innocence, but his appeals fail one by one. Love found me when I least expected it in the form of Daniel Chen, the junior attorney from Hartwell's firm, who'd worked tirelessly on our case. He'd started as legal counsel, but became so invested in Santa's Village's mission that he joined full-time as our general counsel. Somewhere between negotiating preservation easements and designing ethical business practices, we fell in love. Grandmother would have approved. He understood that success meant more than profit margins. Dorothy, freed from family judgment, blossomed into a powerful advocate for disability rights. Her TED Talk about exclusion and belonging went viral, bringing attention and funding to accessibility initiatives nationwide. She turned 60 with a party at Santa's Village that drew hundreds, all celebrating the woman who'd been hidden in shadows, finally standing in the light. The best revenge, she told me that night, is living well and helping others do the same. A year later, on Christmas Eve, we held the first annual Rose Winters Christmas celebration. Free admission hot chocolate for all and carols by the tree Theodore planted. Margaret's children came tentative at first, then losing themselves in the magic like all children do. I caught myself watching them on the carousel, remembering my own childhood here before everything went wrong. Their laughter was a bridge between past pain and future possibilities. That night, as snow fell like blessing, Dorothy and I stood in Grandmother's study, looking at the Christmas box that had saved everything. We'd added our own items, photos from the past year, letters from families whose lives the park had touched. Daniel's proposal, I said yes, and Dorothy's first accessibility award. It had become a tradition, adding proof that Grandmother's legacy lived on. "Do you think she knew?" Dorothy asked, touching the painted reindeer with gentle fingers. "That we'd be strong enough, that we'd choose each other over the money?" I thought about Grandmother's faith in us, how she'd prepared for war while hoping for peace. She knew we'd been tested by family dysfunction and survived. She knew we understood what really mattered because we'd lived without it for so long. The money was never the inheritance, Dorothy. It was the chance to choose differently than they did. The park stretched out below us, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, families were making memories, children were believing in magic, and love was winning over greed, one smile at a time. Margaret would be released next Christmas, and we'd already decided to welcome her back cautiously but genuinely. Richard was 2 years sober, working as a counselor at a gambling addiction center. Even Stuart's children had a trust fund for college because cycles of revenge had to end somewhere. "Merry Christmas, Kathleen," Dorothy said, raising her hot chocolate in a toast. "Merry Christmas, Dorothy," I replied, touching my mug to hers. And in that moment, surrounded by evidence of betrayal transformed into triumph, I heard Grandmother's voice one more time, carried on winter wind. "The truth was in the Christmas box, darlings, but the real magic, that was in you all along." As midnight struck and Christmas Day began, I understood the final lesson. Family isn't just about blood, it's about choice. We'd lost the family we were born into, but found the family we chose. Santa's village would stand for generations to come a testament to the power of truth, the strength of standing together, and the magic that happens when love matters more than money. And somewhere in heaven, I knew Rose. Theodore Winters was smiling, watching her granddaughters carry on the legacy of joy she'd protected with her last breath. The camera pulls back from the lodge, rising above Santa's village as snow continues to fall. The lights below form patterns of hope against the darkness, and if you listen carefully, you can hear the laughter of children yet to come discovering magic in a place where Christmas lives forever. What would you have done if your family chose money over love? Have you ever had to stand up to relatives who lost their way? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of triumph over adversity. Share this video with someone who needs reminding that chosen family can be stronger than blood, and that sometimes the best gifts come in boxes we're afraid to open. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, the magic of Christmas isn't in the presents under the tree, but in the love we choose to share. May your holidays be filled with the family who truly matters, whether born or chosen, and may you always have the courage to fight for what's right.